Okay, in this video, we are going to look at dummy arcs. We're going to look at 2 reasons why dummy arcs are necessary to include in an activity on arc network. And we are going to have a look at an example of CPA being carried out on a network which contains dummy arcs. We're not going to be drawing networks in this video. That will be in the next video when we look at precedence tables. Okay, so there are 2 reasons to include a dummy arc. Okay, they are often necessary, so we need to have need to know what they are. Okay, so reason number 1 is just to ensure that the preceding activities are represented correctly by the network, and reason number 2 is to ensure that the network is simple. So let's have a look at what I mean by these. So number 1, first of all, to ensure that the preceding activity is represented correctly by the network. So I've got an example here where I've got an activity X which relies on activity A being finished before it can be started, and then I've got activity Y which relies on both activities A and B being finished before it can be started. So let's have a node. Let's pop a node in here. Doesn't matter what number it's got. Let's call it number 1. We've got activity A coming into this. I'm not going to put times on it. We're not given times. It's just a visual of why we need to include a dummy arc here. And then activity X relies on A. So I need activity X coming out of that node there. So there's my activity X. Now we come to our problem, because activity Y relies on A and B being completed. So in its current form, I cannot take Y out of this node because that would illustrate that it only relies on activity A. I cannot put Y out of this node and put B into that node because that would say that X relies on A and B, which again is not true. So what I actually need to do is I need to introduce a new node, which I'm going to call node 2, to have Y coming out of it, and have activity B coming into it like this. But at the moment, node 2 only represents activity B being finished. I want A to be finished as well. Now, we don't branch off A. We don't ever split an arc up in a critical path analysis network. What we do instead is we introduce a dummy arc. Now, a dummy arc is a dotted line, like so. It will have an arrow. All arcs on a CPA network will have an arrow. But this node now represents activity B and activity A. So what it does is it kind of maps any inputs into this node and projects them onto this node as well. So now this situation represents exactly my criteria, that activity X relies only on A and activity Y relies on A and B. Okay, so that is the first reason for a dummy arc. The second reason for dummy arc is to ensure that the network is simple. That essentially means that I cannot have a situation like this. I cannot have 2 activities between the same pair of nodes. That is not allowed in a CPA network. Each arc has to be between a unique pair of nodes. So what we do to combat this is we instead say, okay, we've got node I here, we've got node J down there, which has Y going into it. So there's Y, which has a length of T2, but we introduce a new node so that activity X can go into that one, and then I can dummy that on to this one here. Now this represents exactly what this does, but it is allowed because there's no arc going between any one pair of nodes, and then I can have activities coming off and carrying on as normal. So it's just a part of the network. Okay, so this dummy arc is required so that this situation doesn't happen. Okay, and this dummy arc is required so that the precedences for X and Y can be correctly illustrated. Okay, so let's have a look at performing CPA on a network which contains dummy arcs. So here's a activity on arc network which contains dummy arcs. It's got one of each type, so this dummy arc is required because D only relies on A, but E relies on A and B. So that was reason number 1. And then this dummy arc is required because I couldn't have G going from node 4 to node 5 because node F, activity F already does that. So I had to split it out into a separate node and then dummy it onto that node. And it doesn't actually matter which way round F and G are. It's irrelevant. You're just pulling one of them off and putting it into a separate node and then dummying that one on. Okay, so performing CPA, we pop a 0 on the start node, which is the only node in the network which doesn't have any arrows going into it. Forward pass, we're going to add the durations, we're going to follow the arrows, and we're going to take the biggest number. And the only difference is we've got dummy arcs, and in terms of CPA, a dummy arc will count as an activity with a length of 0. So it is an activity with a length of 0. This one's only got one input, so 0 plus 6 is 6. This one's got two inputs. I need to check them both. I've got 0 plus 5 is 5, and 6 plus 0 is 6. The biggest of those is 6, so therefore 6 is the number that gets put in the early start time. This one's only got one input, that's 0 plus 4, so that's 4. This one's only got one input, that's 4 plus 3, which is 7. And then I've got 4 inputs to check for this one. 6 plus 3 is 9, 6 plus 5 is 11, 4 plus 5 is 9, and 7 plus 0 is 7. So the biggest of those was 11. Okay, so that gets put in the left-hand side. Okay, and now the backward pass. So for the backward pass, we duplicate the number here across to the right-hand side, and then instead of adding, we subtract. Instead of taking the biggest, we take the smallest, and instead of taking the following the arrows, we're going to reverse all the arrows. So 11 minus 0 is 11. 11 minus 5 is 6. 11 minus 3 is 8. So 6 gets put there. 11 minus 5 is 6. So that one gets put there. Got two inputs here, so I've got to check them both. 6 minus 0 is 6. And 11 minus 3 is 8. Take the smallest. That's a 6. And then finally, I've got three inputs at the start. So 6 minus 6 is 0. 6 minus 5 is 1. And 4 minus 4 is 2. And the smallest of those is 0. Okay, so that gets put in there. Right, that completes the analysis. Now we just need to state what the minimum completion time of the project is, which is going to be 11, whatever units that is. And then the critical activities, well, we've got activity A. The dummy arc is critical, although obviously it doesn't relate to an activity itself. And then activity E. So we've got two critical activities, A and E. And that's the answer. There we go. Cool, thank you for watching. And next video, we're going to have a look at precedence tables.